at your front doorstep or online at stltoday.com. Or Tuesdays and Thursdays with us. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly.
Hi, Tony.
You know, the least you could have done, McGraw, out of a courtesy for me, knowing of the pain that I'm in today, is ask Jimmy Holder to just skip over the National League wildcard game. I didn't need to relive that. People in St. Louis didn't need to know the score of that game and all those grisly details. You know, you could have just skipped over that.
Well, you know, you have to pay for the Broncos somewhere along the line. So
Yeah, I understand.
Tony, good morning, and yes, I know you're playing today hurt because of the loss of the Rockies last night, but you will shoulder on. So I was the topic of your column the other day, and the premise of your column was everyone's talking and no one's listening.
Yeah, part of it. You know, the bigger thought to me, I wrote a column after Ferguson in which I said that we needed to be a community that uses the word "and" more often. And this was sort of off of that same thing, that this can be true and this can also be true. What happens in these protests all too often, what we're seeing in St. Louis, is everybody divides in the camp. If you criticize the police at all, even when a lot of people clearly think they overstep their bounds in a couple of different situations, then you hate police. And if you criticize the protest movement or don't understand an element of the protest movement, then you're racist. And there's no in between. And this column was an attempt to get people to see that for St. Louis to move forward, for our nation to move forward, I mean, I was mentioning Las Vegas and guns as well, that we have to do a better job of recognizing that compromise is what makes this country great, and recognizing some of the truths in what other people are saying. You can believe that the judge got the Stockley verdict right and still believe that there is institutional racism in our courts and understand why people are protesting. That was the point that I was making, and I took advantage of a little Twitter argument you got involved in to make the point. Because as you know, when you get on Twitter with 140 characters, it's much easier to quickly get into name-calling and extreme separation rather than recognizing, wait a minute, this is somebody I can have a conversation with and possibly help bring to my point of view, or at least understand my point of view a little bit more. That's really what I'm trying to say, is people need to do a better job, I believe, in trying to understand the other point of view rather than simply writing it off.
Right, and it's a very good point. One, and I think should be mentioned every day, all day, and that is you can agree with the verdict and you can disagree with the verdict, but still believe there are problems out there, right? I mean, whether you agree, this individual verdict being what it is, even if the judge would have ruled against Stockley and found him guilty, right? That still doesn't mean institutional racism was going to go away and it was going to be solved, right? So even if it would have been found guilty, there are still problems out there. Regardless of whether this judge ruled one way or the other, we are not talking about the larger picture. And the people who are, quote unquote, against the protesters, to me, come to me and pull their hair out and say, I agree with them. What do they want me to do? What do they want? And it seems like there's a disconnect between what the protesters are doing and what the people who don't necessarily support them but are willing to listen, they don't know what they're saying.
Well, for those people who say that they don't know what the protesters are saying and they want to listen, look at the end of the column. The end of my column points out that a lot of the answers are in the Ferguson Commission. The Ferguson Commission produced this great document after months of painful work in which police officers and protesters sat together in meetings and worked on solutions. It was a beautiful piece of St. Louis democracy at work. And they produced this wonderful document that should guide us forward, that in the last 3 years, our political officials have done very little to pay attention to. And one of the key themes in that document that we're really missing in our discussions today is that the police officers who sat on and supported and informed that commission understood that for them to be safer, to make the lives of our first responders safer, we have to improve trust in our communities of color between people who live there and the police who are supposed to serve them. That is paramount, and nobody really disagrees with that. So what do we do? How do we get there? Well, we have to attack the institutional racism. And the Ferguson Commission report puts together lots and lots of really important ideas on that. And one of the things that is starting to happen now is people are taking that off the shelf. Mayor Lyda Cruzan is taking it off the shelf. The new Forward through Ferguson committee is taking it off the shelf and issuing news releases. And people are saying, wait a minute, we haven't done a lot of these things. What do we need to do? Let's attack these problems. And so say to the young black people in our community, we are listening. We do understand. We have cultural barriers in the city that have existed for decades, for a century, that we still haven't addressed. Let's start working on those problems.
Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch columnist, STLtoday.com, and here Tuesdays and Thursdays.